Hey history buffs, in today's video we're stepping straight into one of the most unforgiving environments you could ever imagine. Late 1942 on the Eastern Front. No postcard snow here, just a wind that slices through wool and skin like it's auditioning for a job as a knife. You're standing on a siding near Rzew, boots crunching on frozen cinders, the sky so pale it feels like the color has been drained from the world. And here's the thing, you probably won't survive this, not without a decent mix of luck, stubbornness, and the occasional miracle. Before you fall asleep, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if stories from deep inside World War II are your kind of thing. Let me know in the comments what city you're tuning in from and what time it is. It always amazes me how far these slow, dusty stories manage to march. Now, get comfortable. Let your mind slow down. We're stepping into another time. No headlines, just the quiet moments that shaped a generation. The train that brought you here is still groaning behind you, the metal of its couplings shuddering in the cold. Coal smoke lingers low to the ground, mixing with the smell of oil from the machine guns in the freight cars. The men of the 206th Infantry Division, your new family, are unloading gear in a kind of frozen ballet, each movement slow and deliberate. You're learning quickly that nothing happens fast in this weather. The faster you move, the more the cold cuts at you. Your breath fogs into small clouds that instantly drift away, shredded by the wind. Somewhere in the distance, toward the east, artillery thumps like a slow heartbeat. You've read about Rzew before in briefing papers. Dense forests, sluggish rivers, and a front line that seems to shift back and forth like a stubborn chess match. You don't need the papers now. You can feel the place in your bones. A Feldwebel with a beard dusted in frost barks an order, his voice sounding like it's been dragged over gravel. You grab your pack from the flat car, it's heavier than you remember from the depot, and sling it onto your back. Inside, you've got everything you're supposed to need to endure a Russian winter. A blanket, a spare shirt, extra socks, some tins of food, and a mess kit. What you don't have, you're already beginning to suspect, is enough warmth. The platform is nothing more than packed snow over wooden beams, slick in places where countless boots have passed. A few men from another unit are leaning on their rifles, faces hidden behind scarves. Their uniforms are the same field grey as yours, but their eyes tell you they've been here longer. They watch you like veterans watching fresh replacements. Curious, maybe sympathetic, but mostly just measuring how long you might last. The wind picks up, and with it comes the fine, needle-like snow that stings any skin you've left uncovered. You pull your scarf higher, thankful for the wool, even if it smells faintly of last month's dew. The Feldwebel orders your squad to fall in, and you shuffle into line. The snow underfoot squeaks, a sound that, you're told, only comes when the mercury dips far below freezing. The march begins, slow at first. You're heading out of the rail yard toward the edge of town, if you can call it a town. Rzew itself lies a few kilometers to the north, but what you see here is more like a collection of low buildings and sheds, half buried in drifts. A horse-drawn sled rattles past, the driver's breath clouding around him, reins wrapped in burlap to keep from sticking to his hands. As you move, you catch fragments of conversation from the men around you. Some are talking about the Rzew meat grinder, the grim nickname the front has earned. Others mutter about Stalingrad, where Paulus's 6th Army is said to be surrounded. You've only been in the army a few months, but you've already learned this truth. No rumor travels faster than bad news in winter. Your boots are already beginning to feel stiff. The issue boots aren't made for this cold. Not really. Wool socks help, but the chill finds its way in through the stitching. A man in front of you adjusts the strap on his carabiner 98K. The rifle's metal catching the faint winter light. You know better than to touch the metal parts without gloves. The skin would stick like wet paper on a wall. After half an hour, you pass a small rise where the snow has been churned into a rough track. The Feldwebel pauses here, letting the column catch up. Off to your right, you can see the frozen ribbon of the Vazuza River, winding between stands of birch. In peacetime, you might call it beautiful. Out here, beauty is measured in whether it can conceal you from the enemy's eyes. Your breath is coming harder now, not from the pace, but from the weight of the air itself. It feels thicker, heavier, like each lungful needs to be earned. You pull your collar up and try to keep your face turned away from the wind. The man behind you mutters something about wishing he was in France, where winter meant rain instead of this endless white. Someone else answers with a joke about how the only thing wetter in France is the wine. Laughter is short, clipped. It takes effort to spare the air. Finally, you see the first line of trees ahead, dark against the pale horizon. This is where your unit's forward area begins. The birch trunk stands straight and thin, bark flaking in papery curls. Snow clings to the branches, falling in soft puffs when the wind shakes them. Somewhere beyond these trees lies the front line, just far enough that you can't hear it yet, but close enough that the thought of it changes the way you walk. The Feldwebel raises a hand and points toward a narrow path cutting through the woods. The men ahead of you vanish into it one by one, the sound of their steps muffled by the snow. When it's your turn, the cold feels different under the canopy. Less wind, more stillness, and a kind of muffled quiet that makes you aware of every creak of leather and crunch of snow beneath your boots. You're not sure how far you walk under those trees. Time seems to dissolve into the rhythm of step, breath, and the occasional shift of your pack. At last, you emerge into a small clearing where logs have been stacked into the beginnings of a shelter. Smoke curls from a rough chimney. Someone has already claimed this patch of forest for the 206th Infantry. A corporal waves you toward a dugout. It's little more than a hole roofed with logs and dirt. But the moment you duck inside, the air feels almost warm by comparison. A small stove in the corner gives off the faint scent of wood smoke and something vaguely edible. Around it, 3 soldiers are hunched over mugs, steam rising from their drinks. One looks up, gives you a nod, and says, "Welcome to Ruzhev." You drop your pack in the corner, aware that you've just taken your first step into a winter that will test every skill, instinct, and ounce of stubbornness you have. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you can't help but wonder, how many of these men will still be here when the snow melts? The dugout smells of damp wool, wood smoke, and a faint hint of machine oil. An oddly comforting mix when you've just stepped off the train into Russia's midwinter. The corporal motions for you to sit on a low bench made from a plank balanced over 2 ammunition crates. The bench creaks under your weight, the sound softened by the snow-packed earth walls around you. Outside, you can hear the wind whispering through the birch trees, but in here it's muted, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. One of the soldiers slides a dented mug across the table toward you. The liquid inside is dark and smells vaguely like coffee, though it's the ersatz variety, ground barley roasted to resemble the real thing. You take a cautious sip. It's hot, bitter, and exactly what you need. You're told this shelter is one of several strung along the edge of the birchwoods outside Sikevka. The 206th Infantry has been here for weeks, part of the thin German line holding against repeated Soviet probes. Everyone knows about the Vrv meat grinder, though the name is whispered more than spoken. The fighting here has been brutal for months. Operation Mars, launched just weeks earlier, left the snow around the Vazuza River churned and scarred. The Soviets came in waves, and though the German line held, the cost was high on both sides. The man sitting opposite you, his collar turned up and helmet resting on the bench beside him, is Obergefreiter Weiss. He has the look of someone who has been here since the summer. Deep lines at the corners of his eyes, and a way of holding his mug, like he's warming more than just his hands. He tells you the shelters were built from logs dragged out of the forest, with the gaps packed full of snow to keep the wind out. A small stove in each dugout burns scavenged firewood, and, when necessary, anything else that will catch. The warmth inside is deceptive. Step outside for more than a few minutes, and the cold will remind you where you are. Weiss warns you about it, almost casually. Don't sweat too much. It freezes fast out here. You'll be walking with ice in your shirt before you know it. You glance around the dugout, noting how everything is arranged for both convenience and survival. Rifles are propped in the corner, their bolts lightly greased to keep the mechanisms from freezing solid. Blankets hang from nails in the wall, not for decoration, but to create extra insulation when the wind shifts. There's a small pile of firewood near the stove, though you suspect it won't last long. When the wind eases a little, you step outside with Weiss. The birch trees stand in loose clusters, their white bark blending almost perfectly with the snow. Narrow trails snake between them, marked only by the faint depressions of boots. In the distance, beyond a frozen clearing, you can just make out a line of snow-covered earthworks. That's the forward position, the actual line where your company will take shifts on watch. Weiss leads you along a narrow path toward another shelter, this one a little larger. Inside, you find a small group of men clustered around a map spread on a wooden crate. A lantern throws a dim yellow light over the paper, highlighting the twisting blue lines of rivers and the shaded areas marking Soviet positions. The company commander, a lean Hauptmann with a neatly trimmed moustache, traces a gloved finger along the map. He nods toward you briefly, then continues speaking in a low voice about patrol routes and the locations of trip flares. When the meeting ends, you help carry a bundle of fresh-cut logs back to your own dugout. The work is slow, not because the wood is heavy, but because every step through the snow feels like walking through wet sand. By the time you return, your breath is frosting your scarf, and your gloves are stiff. That evening, you get your first taste of the routine here. A field kitchen, nicknamed the Goulash Kanone, arrives on a sled, drawn by a pair of weary horses. Steam billows from its chimney, carrying the smell of boiled cabbage and a hint of pork. Men gather quickly, mugs in hand. The cook ladles out portions, his ladle clinking against the metal rim of the pot. It's not gourmet fare, but it's hot, and that's enough. You eat standing outside, snow crunching under your boots, the steam from your mug rising into the brittle night air. Afterward, you take your first shift in one of the forward bunkers. The trench leading to it is shallow, half filled with drifted snow. Inside the bunker, you settle onto a wooden bench beside the firing slit. The view is of a frozen field stretching to the tree line. Somewhere out there, in the darkness between the trees, is the Soviet line. It's quiet tonight, just the occasional crack of a branch under the weight of snow. Hours pass slowly. You and the other sentries speak in low voices, more to stay awake than to share information. He tells you about the Demyansk pocket last winter, when units were surrounded for weeks. The supply drops kept them alive, but the cold was relentless. This, he says, gesturing to the silent field, is easy compared to that. Back in the dugout, the stove glows faintly. You hang your gloves near it to dry, careful not to leave them too close. Melted spots on gear are a sign of carelessness, and no one here can afford that. You unlace your boots, checking your socks for dampness. Another tip from Weiss. Wet feet in this climate are a slow sentence. Before turning in, you notice a small detail. Above Weiss's bunk, a postcard is pinned to the log wall. It shows a lake ringed by pine trees, the water so blue it almost looks unreal. The edges are worn, the image faded from being handled too often. He catches you looking and says simply, Bavaria. Warm summers. He leaves it at that, and so do you. When you finally stretch out on the bench, the sounds of the forest filter in through the walls, the creak of trees, the distant howl of wind, and somewhere far off, the faint thud of artillery. You know you'll get used to it, just like you'll get used to the cold, the routine, and the unspoken understanding that every man here measures time in seasons, not days. You close your eyes, the warmth of the dugout settling over you like a thin blanket, and you can almost forget for a moment that the snow outside hides more than just the earth beneath it. Morning comes slowly here, if you can call it morning at all. The pale light doesn't so much rise as seep into the dugout through the cracks in the roof. You pull yourself upright, shoulders stiff from sleeping in your uniform, and notice the stove has gone cold. Someone, probably Weiss, has already slipped outside to fetch more wood. You hear the crunch of his boots on the frozen snow and the distant sound of an axe biting into a log, each strike echoing softly in the stillness. Your breath hangs in the air even inside the dugout. Outside, the temperature has dropped again, well past the point where the mercury in a thermometer would retreat and hide if it could. You pull on your gloves and scarf before stepping out. The cold hits you instantly, seizing the inside of your nose and making your eyes water. This, they tell you, is the first taste of real Russian winter. The sky is a pale, washed-out grey, like someone painted over the sun. The birches stand motionless, their branches frosted in white, the snow beneath them untouched except for the narrow paths your squad has beaten down over the past days. The air feels heavy and still, the kind of silence that makes you listen harder for what might be hiding in it. Your orders for the day are simple enough. A patrol along a frozen stretch of the Vazuza front. The river lies ahead, invisible for now, but unmistakable once you're close. Its surface covered in a crust of snow that hides the dark ice below. A squad of 6 sets out, rifles slung, steps measured to avoid unnecessary noise. You've been told the Soviets sometimes send scouts across in the early hours, using the drifting snow for cover. As you walk, you try to keep your breathing steady. The cold has a way of turning sharp and painful if you draw it in too fast. Every exhale blooms into a small cloud that floats for a moment before the wind catches it. Your boots squeak against the snow in that strange way you've learned, means the temperature is somewhere south of minus 30 degrees Celsius. Somewhere in the file ahead, a man coughs once, the sound so abrupt in the silence that everyone glances back. Ahead, the patrol leader raises a hand, and you halt. You can see it now, the river, a pale ribbon through the trees, flanked by low banks covered in drifts. Somewhere under that ice, the water still moves, slow and dark. You've heard stories about men falling through in places where the current has thinned the ice. They vanish in moments, swallowed by the cold. One man mutters something about the Volkhov last winter, where a similar patrol lost 2 before they even reached the far bank. The leader sends 2 men ahead to check a line of snow-covered shrubs along the near bank. You and the others fan out, eyes scanning the tree line across the river. Nothing moves, but the stillness here feels deliberate, like the forest is holding its breath. Weiss mutters under his own, something about the calm before Ivan starts up again. The inspection turns up nothing unusual. No fresh tracks, no sign of disturbance in the snow. Still, the patrol leader insists on a slow sweep along the bank. You keep one eye on the opposite shore, where the dark shapes of pines stand against the grey sky. Somewhere out there are Soviet sentries doing the same, their view of you framed by frost-covered branches. After an hour, the patrol turns back toward the birchwoods. The walk is slower this time, fatigue setting in as the cold gnaws at your legs. The wind has shifted, bringing with it a sharper edge that stings any exposed skin. You pull your scarf higher, adjusting it so it covers the tip of your nose. Back at the dugout, the stove is lit again, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the pipe. You stamp the snow from your boots before stepping inside, the warmth hitting you like a wave. Someone has set a tin pot of water on the stove, and steam is already starting to rise from it. You peel off your gloves and hold your hands over the warmth, feeling the slow return of sensation. Weiss sits on the bench, a scrap of newspaper in his hands. He's reading aloud in a slow, deliberate voice, something about operations farther south. There's mention of Paulus and the 6th Army, more rumors about encirclement in Stalingrad. No one says much in response. The Eastern Front is a web of distant disasters and local quiets, and everyone knows how quickly one can become the other. The rest of the day passes in the subdued rhythm of winter service. Small tasks, small conversations, small comforts. You help patch the dugout roof with strips of burlap to keep the snow from sifting in. Another man sharpens a spade for digging firing positions, though the ground is so frozen it might as well be stone. The minutes stretch, marked only by the soft hiss of the stove and the occasional whistle of wind outside. In the late afternoon, you take another turn at the forward bunker. The snow has picked up again, the flakes small and hard, blowing sideways into the firing slit. You brush them away with a gloved hand and peer out into the white blur. It's strange. Your world here is reduced to a few hundred meters of snow, trees and sky. Yet every shift feels subtly different. The light changes, the wind shifts, and sometimes you think you can hear movement in the snow when there's none at all. Night comes early in this season. By the time you're back in the dugout, the forest is swallowed in darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the stove and a single lantern. You eat your ration of black bread and tinned meat in near silence, the soft clink of cutlery the only sound. Weiss offers you a slice of something from home, a dried sausage sent in a parcel, and you trade him a cigarette in return. Later, lying on the bench with your blanket pulled tight, you think about the river, about the silent tree line beyond it. You imagine the Soviet scouts, crouched in their own dugouts, staring out across the same frozen stretch. In another world, you might be sharing the same fire, swapping stories. But here, in this winter, the distance between you is measured in more than meters. Outside, the wind rises, carrying fine snow through the cracks in the roof. You pull the blanket tighter and listen to the stove ticking as it cools, the sound fading into the deep, still silence that only a Russian winter can hold. The word comes just after dawn. The night patrol heard something. It's vague. No one's sure if it was the wind through the birches or the crunch of boots on snow. But it's enough to have you out of the dugout early. The captain wants eyes along the forward trench before the sun has fully climbed over the tree line. The trench itself is hardly what the manuals describe. In summer, it was a narrow, muddy cut between sandbags, but now it's a frozen channel lined with ice-crusted boards. The snow drifts over its lip constantly, so you move in a crouch, brushing the white powder away from your boots as you go. Your breath curls upward and hangs there, a faint ghost above the parapet. The air has that brittle quality again, the kind that cracks skin and turns the tips of your ears raw if you're not careful. Somewhere beyond the front line lies the frozen curve of the ridge of Solient, though you wouldn't know it from here. The land is flat, the sky vast, and the line between friend and foe is drawn only in hidden wires and watchful eyes. You pass the listening post, a little hollow dug into the side of the trench. 2 men are there, wrapped in layers of wool and canvas, rifles propped within reach. One offers you a sip from his canteen, but the water inside is already half ice. You take it anyway. It's better than the metallic taste of snowmelt. The talk is quiet and in pieces. Someone heard machine gun fire far to the north last night, perhaps around Belly. Another swears the Soviets are moving more men into the sector, though how he'd know is anyone's guess. Out here, rumour travels faster than orders. At the forward position, you climb the frozen firing step and look out. The snowfield ahead is unbroken, except for the scattered mounds where old shell craters have filled and frozen. Beyond, the tree line is dark and still, the branches heavy with frost. You think about the Soviet side. Somewhere out there, men like you are making the same morning checks, peering through their own narrow slits, wondering if you'll move first. An hour passes. The light grows, but the sky never quite brightens. It's more like the grey has simply shifted to a paler shade. A faint wind carries tiny ice crystals that sting your cheeks. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep the cold from settling into your legs. Then it comes, a faint crunch in the distance. You freeze, head tilting slightly, straining to separate it from the wind's whisper. There it is again, irregular, as if someone's stepping carefully. You glance at the man next to you. He's heard it too. The patrol leader signals for quiet, and the trench stills. For a long moment, nothing moves. Then, in the haze of drifting snow, you catch a flicker of movement near one of the shell mounds. It's low, deliberate, then gone. Could be a hair, could be something else. No one speaks, but you can feel the alertness sharpen, like a drawn wire. Your hand rests on the rifle's grip, the leather stiff under your fingers. The seconds stretch, the wind tugs at your scarf, and still nothing breaks the white stillness ahead. Finally, the patrol leader waves you back down into the trench. No need to waste energy chasing shadows. The walk back is quieter. The frost has deepened on the trench walls, turning the wood lining into pale, glistening ribs. Somewhere behind you, a sentry coughs into his scarf. By the time you reach the dugout, the faint warmth of the stove feels almost shocking. Inside, someone set a tin of ersatz coffee onto heat. It smells faintly of roasted barley, bitter and thin, but it's hot, and that's enough. You wrap your hands around the cup, letting the steam soften your fingers. Weiss is already talking again, something about a rumor from Army Group Center. That Model himself might be inspecting positions soon. You picture the general's stern face from the photographs and wonder if he'd find your little trench acceptable. The rest of the day drifts by in the way winter days often do. You're tasked with reinforcing the dugout wall, wedging new planks into place where the frost has split the old ones. The hammer's metal head sticks to your glove once, forcing you to peel it off with a hiss. A little later, someone starts chopping wood outside, the rhythm steady and reassuring against the silence. Around midday, you're sent with 2 others to collect more wire for the forward line. The role is awkward to carry, heavier than it looks, and the snow makes each step deliberate. Along the path, you pass a half-buried signpost marking the distance to Smolensk. It's leaning at an odd angle, half covered by drift, but the name is still clear. You think about how far that feels from here, even though the numbers on the sign insist it isn't much. Back at the dugout, you find that the stove has been coaxed into a proper fire. The warmth reaches even the far bench, where your rifle rests against the wall. You take a moment to clean the bolt, wiping away the faint frost that creeps into the metal overnight. Every task here, no matter how small, seems to carry the quiet weight of necessity. In the afternoon, you return to the trench for another watch. The snow has thickened, making the horizon dissolve into a seamless white. You listen to the muted sounds around you, the faint groan of a tree shifting under frost, the creak of a frozen strap, the muffled clink of a canteen being set down. These small noises become landmarks in the endless quiet. As the light begins to fade, you hear a distant, hollow thud. It's far off, maybe even artillery practice, but it's enough to make the men pause. The sound carries strangely in the cold, stretching out like a long breath. No follow-up comes, and soon the trench returns to its rhythm. By the time you're relieved, the darkness is already settling in. The path back to the dugout is lit only by the faint glow from its doorway. Inside, the air smells faintly of wood smoke and something frying on the stove. Probably potato slices in whatever oil could be found. You take your place on the bench, easing your gloves off and letting your fingers thaw. Later, as you lie under your blanket, you think about the movement you saw near the shell mound. It could have been nothing at all, just the snow shifting under the wind. But in the quiet of the Russian night, small possibilities take on their own weight. Somewhere out there, someone might be wondering if you saw them. The captain arrives in the late morning, his presence announced not by trumpets or shouted orders, but by the sudden sharpening of posture along the trench. Even before you see him, you hear the scrape of boots on frozen planks and the low murmurs falling silent in his wake. When he appears around the bend, he's wrapped in the standard greatcoat, but his eyes are uncovered, 2 sharp points scanning every corner of the line. It's Oberleutnant Kramer, the kind of officer whose gaze makes you stand a little straighter, even if you're sure you've done nothing wrong. His collar tabs catch what little light there is, the silver braid faint but distinct against the dull wool. He doesn't speak at first. Instead, he walks the length of the trench, stopping here and there to inspect the firing step, the angle of the sandbags, the placement of the wire. You watch him from a few paces away, feeling the odd mix of pride and dread that always comes with inspection. Like handing over a book report you know is decent, but not sure will pass. When he reaches you, Kramer pauses. "Rifle," he says simply, holding out a gloved hand. You pass it over, and he checks the chamber, cycles the bolt, nods once. His approval is subtle, a barely perceptible lift of the chin, but you feel it all the same. He asks how the watch has been, his tone even. You tell him about the faint movement in the snow the previous morning, careful to keep it factual. He listens without interruption, then tells the patrol leader to make note of it. Whether it means anything or not, he doesn't say. As he moves on, you catch a faint whiff of tobacco from his coat. Real tobacco, not the crumbling ersatz kind. You wonder if he's saving the last of his supply from home, rationing each pinch for moments when the cold and monotony weigh heavier than usual. After the inspection, the tension in the trench eases. Men return to their conversations, their quiet card games, their careful repair of worn straps and mittens. But the captain's presence lingers, like the fading ring of a bell. His approval, or disapproval, can shift the mood of the whole platoon. Around midday, Kramer calls a short meeting in the dugout. You crowd in with a dozen others, the air thick with steam from melting snow on coats. He lays out the day's orders. More wire along the eastern sector, an additional listening post closer to the tree line, and tighter watch schedules for the next week. There's mention of increased Soviet activity in the region, though details are scarce. Someone asks if this means a push is coming. Kramer's answer is measured. We prepare as if it is. If it doesn't come, we lose nothing. It's the kind of line you could imagine being written in a field manual. But coming from him, it feels less like a platitude and more like a quiet truth. After the meeting, you're assigned to the wire team. It's a slow job, measuring lengths, hammering stakes into frozen ground, making sure the strands are tight, but not so taut they'll snap in the cold. The work leaves your gloves stiff with frost and your breath coming in visible bursts. Still, there's a rhythm to it, and by mid-afternoon, the section is complete. When you return to the dugout, the captain is there, speaking quietly with the radio man. A map is spread across the table, its surface marked with pencil lines and small red circles. You can't see the details from where you stand, but you recognize the curve of the river and the faint outline of the forest to the east. Later, you're told that Kramer served in France during 40, that he has a knack for reading the land like a book. Some say he can tell where an enemy will move just by the way the trees bend in the wind. Whether it's true or not, you can't say, but there's something about the way he studies the horizon that makes you think he sees more than most. In the evening, he walks the line again, this time with fewer words and a slower pace. He stops to speak briefly with the sentries, asks about their food, their gloves, the fit of their boots. Small questions, but each one makes the man he's speaking to stand a little taller. At one point, he pauses near the forward post and simply listens. The wind rattles the wire faintly, like a string of distant bells. Snow shifts in small cascades from the sandbags. You stand beside him in silence, feeling the weight of the cold settle in your bones. Finally, he nods, satisfied, and turns back toward the dugout. After he leaves, the trench feels quieter, though nothing has changed. His inspections aren't dramatic. No shouting, no throwing of gear into the snow. But they leave a mark. You think about how command must feel from his side, balancing caution with urgency, keeping men steady without promising safety. By nightfall, the orders are already shaping the routine. The listening post is extended forward by a few meters, the extra wire in place, the watch schedule adjusted. These aren't sweeping changes, but they add to the invisible layers of preparation that stretch between you and whatever might be moving beyond the tree line. In the dugout, you hear Kramer speaking again with the radio man, his voice low. A name drifts to your ears, Vyazma, and you recall the stories from last year, when entire formations were caught in encirclement. The name carries a certain chill, as if it belongs more to cautionary tales than to current orders. When you finally settle into your place on the bench, you realize you've barely eaten all day. One of the others passes you a heel of bread, dense and slightly frozen, and you chew it slowly, letting the warmth from the stove seep into your back. Before turning in, you step outside for a moment. The air is still, the snow underfoot creaking in sharp little notes. You look toward the east, where the tree line is just a dark smear against the sky. Somewhere out there, men you'll never meet are standing in their own lines, scanning the same horizon. And somewhere behind you, a captain you barely know is quietly making sure you're ready for whatever comes. When you go back inside, the stove pops softly, and the room smells faintly of smoke and wool. The day's tasks blur into one another, but the image that stays with you is Kramer's steady gaze, measuring, weighing, and perhaps in some way guarding. The radio man's corner in the dugout is the closest thing to magic you've got out here. Not the flashy kind, no sparks or glowing wands, but the quiet, stubborn magic of thin copper wires pulling voices out of thin air. You pass him often enough, hunched over the battered receiver, headphones clamped to his ears, scribbling in a worn notebook as though each scratch of the pencil is another mile of trench built between you and the unknown. His name's Schulte, and he's been with the company longer than most. He's the kind of man who speaks in short sentences and moves like he's got all the time in the world, which is funny, considering how often he's the one bringing word that time is about to run out. Right now, the air in his little alcove is warmer than the rest of the dugout. Heat from the lamp, the faint smell of ozone and varnished wood from the set itself. He's catching a burst of Morse from Lorient, the dots and dashes like a woodpecker inside a tin can. You can't make sense of it, but his pencil keeps moving, pausing only to tap the side of the headset like he's coaxing a stubborn old man to keep talking. It's strange how news travels out here. A man on the other end of the wire might be hundreds of kilometers away, somewhere in the relative comfort of a rear command post, but his message lands here in seconds. Sometimes it's orders about supply drops or patrol shifts. Other times, it's just weather reports. And every now and then, it's something heavier. A note that a nearby regiment has pulled back, or that the Soviets have been spotted massing artillery. Today's transmission is somewhere in between. Schulte looks up as you pass and says, "They've had movement near Kaluga. Not close, but close enough they're paying attention." You nod, though the name sits like a weight in your stomach. Kaluga is far enough away that it shouldn't matter. But then again, distances on the Eastern Front have a way of shrinking when you least expect it. Later in the afternoon, the captain joins him, pulling a chair up beside the set. The two of them speak in low voices, their heads bent over the map. You notice Schulte pointing to a thin line of pencil marks, his finger tracing a path that cuts across the snowbound terrain toward your sector. The captain listens without interrupting, then folds the map carefully, as if it's fragile glass. You've heard rumors about how messages from higher up aren't always what they seem. Some historians, years later, would argue that frontline units were often kept in the dark, fed just enough information to keep them moving without causing panic. Whether that's true here or not, you can't say, but you know Schulte sometimes hears more than he writes down. That evening, during a lull, you linger by his table. The lamp casts deep shadows across his face, making his eyes look sunken but alert. You ask him what it's like, hearing everything first. He shrugs. It's not hearing it first that matters. It's hearing it all day, every day. After a while, you start thinking in dots and dashes instead of words. He tells you about an intercept a few days ago. Nothing dramatic, just a fragment of a Soviet weather update drifting in on a strange frequency. But the voice had been so clear, so calm, that for a moment it didn't feel like an enemy transmission. Could have been someone's uncle talking about the snow, he says, then goes back to adjusting the tuning dial. By nightfall, a fresh set of orders arrives. Double the listening posts along the sector. Rotate watch shifts every 2 hours instead of 3. The dugout grows busier as men shuffle gear, check rifles, and prepare for a colder, longer night. Schulte stays at his desk, pencil tapping a steady rhythm against the edge of the notebook. When your turn at the post comes, the stars are sharp and cold overhead, the moon hanging low like it doesn't want to be here either. You think about how every movement you see, a shadow in the tree line, a flicker of light, could end up as a scrap of paper on Schulte's desk before dawn. There's a comfort in knowing someone like him is listening, not just for the obvious signals, but for the small, strange ones. Once, he swore he could tell the difference between a Soviet unit on the move and one settling in for the night, just by the way their operators tapped out their codes. People don't think about their hands, he said, but hands tell you everything. Back in the dugout after your shift, you see him leaning back in his chair, eyes half closed, but still wearing the headset. The set crackles softly, like a distant fire you can't quite see. You wonder if he ever really sleeps, or if his dreams are just more dots and dashes, rearranging themselves into orders and warnings. One night, just before you drift off, you hear him murmur something under his breath. A name maybe, or a location. You don't catch it, but it makes you think about all the pieces of the war that pass through this trench without ever being seen. Men and machines moving miles away. Battles starting and ending without a sound here. Yet all of it leaving faint fingerprints in the static Schulte listens to. Weeks from now, you'll remember the way he sat there on nights like this. Head bent, hand steady, the quiet middleman between far-off plans and the frozen mud under your boots. And you'll realize that his little corner, lit by a single lamp, was as much a part of the front as the wire and the rifles. For now, though, is just another night. The orders are posted, the watches are set, and the radioman keeps listening, pulling the world in through a coil of wire, one whisper at a time. If Schulte's corner is the place where words arrive, the trench line itself is where those words become reality. Orders about more listening posts mean someone has to actually stand there in the freezing dark. And tonight, that someone is you. The snow along the trench has been trampled into something halfway between ice and mud, slick under your boots. You follow the line to the new forward watch position, a shallow bend reinforced with sandbags and frozen logs. There's not much room, just enough for you and another man, Hartmann, to stand shoulder to shoulder without knocking elbows. Hartmann's been here almost as long as Schulte, and he's the kind of soldier who can make even the worst night seem bearable with a well-timed joke. Tonight, though, he's quieter than usual, his breath a pale cloud in the moonlight, as he scans the tree line through the narrow slit between sandbags. From here, you can just make out the edge of the forest, black shapes against the white ground. Somewhere out there are Soviet positions. How far, nobody really knows. The front shifts like the weather. One day they're a kilometer away. The next, they pushed back, and then they're gone again. You've heard stories from veterans about how the lines could be so close that men would shout insults across them. But here, the silence feels heavier than any argument. Every few minutes, you sweep your field glasses over the terrain, the lenses fogging almost instantly in the cold. There's nothing to see except snow, shadows, and the occasional flicker of moonlight on ice. But you keep looking, because out here, the one time you don't is the time something happens. Hartman shifts beside you, muttering that it's too quiet. That's not a good sign, not here. Some scholars have debated whether Soviet night tactics were designed more to unsettle than to attack outright. Small movements, distant lights, phantom noises. Whether that's true or not, you've learned that the imagination can do more damage than a rifle if you give it enough room to wander. Around midnight, a faint sound reaches you. A slow, deliberate crunch of snow from somewhere ahead. You freeze, straining to hear past the wind. Hartman hears it too. You can tell by the way his posture changes, his rifle coming up just a little higher. The sound stops. For a long moment, nothing moves. Then, just as you're about to convince yourself it was an animal, you catch the faintest glint of metal far out in the field. You signal to Hartman, and the two of you keep watching, but the glint doesn't move. It could be a helmet, a rifle barrel, or just ice catching the moonlight. Out here, it's impossible to know for sure until it's too late. You make a note of the location in your head. Schulte will want to hear about it when you're back. The hours drag on, the cold settling deeper into your bones until you feel more like part of the trench than a man standing in it. You think about the way the orders came down earlier, neat handwriting on a piece of paper, and how different it feels to be on the receiving end of that decision. Somewhere far behind the lines, someone is sleeping in a bed, certain that you're awake out here, doing exactly what you're doing. By the time your relief arrives, your legs are stiff and your hands ache from gripping your rifle. You make your way back along the trench, the air somehow even colder now that you're not moving as much. Inside the dugout, Schulte is still at his post, the glow of the lamp painting him in amber light. You tell him about the sound and the glint, and he makes a small mark in his notebook without looking up. Could be nothing, he says, but I'll keep an ear out. The next day, there's fresh snow, and whatever you saw, or thought you saw, has been buried under a clean white layer. Hartman cracks a joke about snow being the best camouflage the Soviets ever had, and you can't argue with him. The men are busy repairing parts of the trench wall, where the frost has loosened the logs, and the rhythm of shovels and hammers almost makes you forget the tension of the night before. Almost. That evening, you notice extra rations being handed out. Just a bit more bread, and a thicker slice of sausage. It's not much, but it feels like a small acknowledgement that the nights are getting harder. Some say the captain ordered it to keep morale up. Others think it's just because the supply wagon arrived on time for once. Whatever the reason, you take it as a good omen. Later, as you're heading to your bunk, you hear Schulte's voice again. Quiet, steady, speaking into the field telephone. You can't make out the words, but you know they're about last night. Somewhere, someone is adding your little report to a much bigger picture. Lines being drawn and erased on maps you'll never see. The thought sits with you as you drift off. Out here, information is as much a weapon as any rifle. And while you may never know the full story, you've learned enough to trust that even the smallest details, a crunch in the snow, a flash of metal, can be the difference between a quiet night and a frantic one. The thaw never really comes here, but there are days when the cold softens just enough to turn the ground into a half-frozen slush. Those are the days the trench walls weep. Meltwater seeps in, soaking into the straw at your feet, until every step makes a damp, sucking sound. You start the morning hauling sandbags to reinforce a sagging section near the eastern bend. It's work that leaves your arms aching, but at least it's movement, and movement keeps the cold from pinning you in place. The air smells faintly of damp earth, a rare break from the usual mix of wood smoke and gun oil, and you almost let yourself enjoy it. By midday, the company is buzzing with a low, restless energy. Word filters down that a supply convoy is due to arrive from Army Group Centre's rear depots near Orsha. You've learned to take such news with a pinch of salt. Promises on the Eastern Front travel faster than the sledges carrying them. Still, it's hard not to imagine the possibility. Fresh bread, maybe a tin of real coffee, even cigarettes that don't taste like damp paper. In the afternoon, you spot movement far down the snow-covered road that winds towards your position. Through your field glasses, you catch the shapes of horses pulling sledges, each one piled high and flanked by men in greatcoats. The scene is so normal-looking, so far removed from the usual tension, that you almost forget the danger. Almost. There's always a risk with convoys. Partisans know the routes as well as you do, and Soviet reconnaissance patrols sometimes try their luck. You remember hearing about a convoy ambushed last month near Vitebsk. Only half the sledges made it through, and those carried mostly ammunition, not food. Still, the captain sends a squad forward to meet them, rifles at the ready. When the sledges finally pull up, you can see the relief on the drivers' faces. They're as eager to unload as you are to see what's inside. The quartermaster, a stocky sergeant named Weber, starts calling out items in a brisk voice, ticking them off on his clipboard. Sacks of flour, crates of canned meat, small barrels of sauerkraut, and, miracle of miracles, a few boxes of chocolate from some forgotten reserve in the Reich. The men cheer at that, though it's more of a tired cheer, the kind that acknowledges a small victory in a place where victories are scarce. You get your share, a thin wedge of chocolate wrapped in foil that you decide to save for later, maybe for a night when the wind is howling and the trench feels particularly lonely. While the supplies are being distributed, Hartmann sidles up with his usual grin. "Think they'll send us wine next?" he jokes. You shake your head, but part of you can't help picturing it. Bottles clinking together, the smell of something richer than coffee or broth. It's a dangerous habit, imagining too much. Out here, expectations can be as treacherous as ice. As the sledges turn to leave, the captain orders a quick inspection of the forward positions. The logic is simple. New supplies mean a higher risk of enemy attention. You're sent to check the listening post you occupied 2 nights ago, the same one where you spotted the possible glint of metal. The snow has changed the landscape, erasing tracks and softening the jagged edges of the terrain. You crouch behind the sandbags, scanning the tree line. Nothing moves. Still, you linger a moment longer than necessary, letting your eyes trace every shadow. In the back of your mind, you hear Schulte's voice reminding you that patterns matter, that small details often carry the biggest weight. By the time you return, dusk has settled in, and the men are gathering in the dugout to share coffee brewed from the new tins. It's bitter, strong, and laced with more grounds than anyone would accept back home. But here, it's better than gold. You cradle your tin cup, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers. The talk drifts to home. Berlin, Dresden, small towns you've never heard of, but now know as if they were your own. Someone mentions the latest rumors about the front, how some historians would later argue that by this stage of the winter, Soviet supply lines were straining as much as yours. Whether that's true, or just a soldier's wishful thinking, It's enough to spark a round of speculation. Hartman tells a story about his uncle's bakery in Bremen, how the smell of fresh bread would carry all the way to the docks. He swears that when he gets back, he's going to eat an entire loaf in one sitting. You tell him you'll believe it when you see it, and he laughs, saying you'll both be there to find out. That night, lying in your bunk, you unwrap the piece of chocolate. It's small enough to vanish in a single bite, but you let it sit on your tongue, melting slowly. For a moment, the dugout fades away, replaced by a memory of a warm kitchen, the sound of a kettle on the stove, and the knowledge that you didn't have to watch the horizon every few seconds. The moment doesn't last, but it's enough. You drift off with the taste still faint on your tongue, knowing that tomorrow will be another day of hauling sandbags, scanning tree lines, and waiting for whatever comes next. But for tonight at least, you've had something sweet. The wind shifts overnight, sweeping down from the north with a sharpness that feels almost personal. It finds its way through every gap in your greatcoat, cutting along your spine, no matter how tightly you pull the collar up. By morning, the trench floor is frozen solid again, the water gone, but replaced by a brittle crust that crunches underfoot. You're assigned to the early watch along the western approach, the sector that looks out over a stretch of open ground, broken only by a few skeletal birch trees. Somewhere beyond those trees lies the rail line the Soviets keep trying to repair, a line your regiment has shelled at least a dozen times in the last month. You can almost see it in your mind, the warped rails, the shattered ties, the twisted metal of a maintenance cart abandoned after the last attack. Leaning on your rifle, you scan the tree line through a narrow gap between sandbags. The light is pale and thin, filtering through high clouds in a way that flattens everything. It's the kind of light that makes distance hard to judge, that leaves you unsure whether that dark patch is a shadow or something moving. You decide it's a shadow, at least for now. Around mid-morning, you hear the crunch of boots behind you. It's Feldwebel Kraus, the senior NCO for your company, a man whose voice could carry over artillery fire without losing its edge. He doesn't waste time on small talk. Instead, he leans beside you, looking out at the same empty ground. "They'll try again," he says, not as a guess, but as a certainty. They always do. That line's their lifeline to the front. Kraus has a way of speaking that makes you believe him, even when you wish you didn't. You nod, and he moves on, his silhouette shrinking down the trench line. The day passes in a rhythm of small, repetitive tasks, checking the bolt on your rifle, stamping your feet to keep the circulation going, scanning the same patch of snow until your eyes ache. Every so often, a distant rumble rolls in from the east, artillery maybe, or just the frozen ground settling. Out here, the two can sound dangerously similar. Afternoon mess, a tin of thin soup with floating islands of fat. You're rotated off watch and sent to help with fortifications. The engineers in the neighboring platoon have scrounged up a few rolls of barbed wire from a depot near Smolensk, and the captain wants it strung along the outer perimeter before nightfall. It's miserable work. The wire is stiff with ice, the gloves too clumsy for finesse, and every tug sends a shiver up your arms. But it's work that matters, and in a strange way, that makes it bearable. By late afternoon, the sun is a pale disk sinking behind the birches. Shadows stretch long across the snow, and the air grows heavier, as if holding its breath. You find yourself glancing toward the west more often now, expecting movement. The memory of Kraus's voice lingers. They'll try again. As you're coiling the last length of wire, the distant crack of a rifle splits the quiet. You freeze, listening. A second shot follows, then a third, spaced irregularly. Someone on the forward listening post fires back, and the calm is gone. Orders come fast. Grab your weapon, take position, eyes on the approach. You scramble to your assigned spot, heart thudding in your ears. Through the scope, you catch flashes of movement near the tree line, dark shapes darting between the birches, pausing just long enough to fire before slipping back into cover. They're probing, testing, trying to see if you'll bite. The return fire is measured, disciplined. You've learned the hard way not to waste ammunition in a place where resupply is never guaranteed. The Soviets don't press the attack. Instead, after a few minutes, the movement fades and the tree line goes still. But the silence feels different now, charged, expectant. When night falls, the captain doubles the sentries. You draw second watch, the one that starts when the cold is deepest and ends just before dawn. Sitting in the dark, you listen to the small noises the trench makes at night. The creak of timber supports, the faint rustle of straw, the occasional muffled cough from someone trying not to wake the others. Somewhere in the distance, you hear what might be a train whistle, thin and wavering. It could be the wind, or it could be the Soviets managing to run a supply train under cover of darkness. Historians still argue whether those night runs ever really succeeded during this stage of the campaign. But in the moment, all you know is that the sound raises the hairs on your arms. Around 0400, movement catches your eye. A low, hunched figure slipping from one shadow to another near the wire. You tighten your grip on the rifle, every muscle ready. But the figure stops, then turns back toward the trees, vanishing into the dark. You exhale slowly, realizing only then how tight your chest had been. When your relief finally comes, you hand over your post with the usual quiet nod, then make your way to the dugout. Inside, the air is warmer, thick with the smell of damp wool and yesterday's coffee grounds. You collapse onto your bunk, boots still on, and let the stiffness drain from your limbs. It takes a long time to fall asleep, your mind still running through the night's events. You keep seeing the dark shapes in the trees, the flash of movement near the wire, the imagined gleam of rails under moonlight. By the time sleep finally comes, it's shallow and restless, full of half-formed dreams about trains you can't catch and tree lines that never end. Dawn seeps into the sky without much ceremony, just a gradual lifting of the black replaced by a pale blue streaked with thin clouds. The kind of winter morning that doesn't promise warmth, only visibility. You rise with the rest of the squad, shrugging into your stiff greatcoat, the fabric holding the shape of yesterday's creases like armor. Today, you're ordered to join a small patrol along the frozen river that marks part of your sector's boundary. The river, more of a wide creek in the summer, has frozen thick, the ice clouded with trapped bubbles and flecked with wind-blown snow. Somewhere upstream, engineers have rigged a crude footbridge out of scavenged planks, a crossing point used for quick runs to the listening post on the far bank. The patrol is led by Unteroffizier Meissner, a wiry veteran who's been here since before the first snow fell. He has that particular calm that comes from surviving more than one winter on the Eastern Front, and he wears it like a second uniform. As the five of you move along the riverbank, he keeps his eyes not on the trees ahead, but on the snow at your feet, scanning for tracks. Man or animal, either could be trouble. About half an hour in, you find a set of prints crossing the river at a narrow bend. They're fresh, sharp-edged, the snow inside still crystalline. Could be scouts, could be partisans, could be nothing at all. But out here, nothing at all isn't a gamble you take. Meissner signals a halt, crouches to study them, then points toward the far bank. The patrol crosses in single file, the ice creaking faintly under your boots despite the deep freeze. On the other side, the trees close in. Birch and pine press close together, their branches netted with frost. The snow here lies undisturbed except for those prints, which weave through the trunks before disappearing in the undergrowth. Meissner takes the lead again, following their ghost trail until you come to a small clearing. At its center stands a hunting blind, the wood weathered and splintered. It's empty now, but a few scuffed patches in the snow suggest it hasn't been long since someone was here. The patrol doesn't linger. You mark the location on a folded map, Meissner's pencil scratching in quick, practiced strokes, and then head back toward the river. The return feels longer, the silence heavier. Even the snow seems to absorb sound here, muting each step until you feel like you're moving through someone else's dream. By midday, you're back inside the perimeter, shaking off the cold in the dugout. There's a brief report to the captain. Short, clipped sentences about tracks, the blind, and nothing else to add. He listens without comment, then nods once, dismissing you with a flick of his hand. Whether he plans to act on the information is anyone's guess. You've learned that sometimes knowing too much only makes a man slower to sleep. The afternoon is given over to maintenance. Your rifle gets its weekly cleaning, the metal biting cold through the rag. You wipe away the faint smear of old oil, replace it with a thin coat from the tin in your kit, and check the action until it's smooth enough to work one-handed. There's comfort in the ritual, something predictable in a place where very little is. Outside, the weather turns. A low wind sweeps in from the east, carrying with it a dust of fine snow that prickles the skin. It's not a blizzard, not yet, but it's enough to make visibility poor. Guard rotations are shortened to keep men from stiffening too much at their posts. Your evening watch is at the southern edge, where the trench line hooks toward a stand of pines. From here, you can see the distant glint of ice on the river and the faint smudge of smoke from the cookhouse chimney. The wind brings with it the smell of boiled cabbage, oddly comforting despite its thinness. Halfway through the watch, Meissner stops by. He doesn't say much, just checks the alignment of the sandbags, squints at the horizon, and mentions that he's put in a request for more wire near the river crossing. Whether it arrives before spring is another matter. Night drops fast. One moment the snow is silver under the fading light. The next, it's swallowed by the kind of dark that makes you feel as if the world has shrunk to just the few meters in front of you. The pines groan in the wind, their branches shedding clumps of snow that land with muffled thuds. Near the end of your shift, you think you hear something. Faint, deliberate crunches in the snow beyond the perimeter. You hold your breath, listening, but the wind is a trickster tonight, bending sounds and sending them from nowhere in particular. You don't call it in. You've been fooled before. Still, you keep your rifle close, eyes straining at the dark until your relief arrives. In the dugout, you strip off your outer coat, the fabric stiff with frost, and settle onto the narrow bunk. The air inside is warmer, tinged with smoke from the iron stove in the corner. A few men are already asleep, their breath rising in slow clouds. Someone hums quietly, an old song from home that you can't quite place. As you drift off, your thoughts circle back to the prints by the river, the empty blind, the way Meissner's pencil scratched on the map. You imagine the Soviets, or partisans, slipping through the trees under cover of night, knowing the terrain as well as you know the creases in your own gloves. Somewhere out there, The other side is making its own patrols, telling its own stories, scanning its own tree lines. And in the quiet, you can almost hear both sides breathing in unison, separated by snow, wire, and the long reach of a war that shows no sign of letting spring through. Morning comes with a dull, pale light that barely manages to seep through the cloud cover. It feels like the sun has grown shy this winter, reluctant to show itself for more than a handful of hours each day. The dugout smells faintly of damp wool and the lingering trace of last night's cabbage soup, both stubborn scents that cling to the air. Orders arrive not long after first coffee, a thin bitter brew that tastes more like scorched water than anything else. Today, you're on supply detail. That means a trudge to the forward storage pit, a few hundred meters from the main line, where crates of ammunition, tins of food, and spare tools are kept under a cover of snow and tarpaulin. The detail is led by Feldwebel Kranz, a heavyset man from Hamburg with a permanent squint and a voice that carries even when he whispers. He moves slowly but surely, every step deliberate. The path to the supply pit is narrow, carved between low mounds of snow, where the wind has scoured the surface down to a crust. The storage area itself is little more than a reinforced trench with wooden walls and a roof of interlaced logs buried under snow for insulation. Inside, it's dim and cold, your breath hanging in the air like smoke. You check the manifest against the crates, chalk markings scrawled in blocky numbers. Some tins are dented, some paper wrapping soft with damp, but most of it is serviceable. Kranz assigns you to haul ammunition, 2 boxes of rifle rounds and 1 of MG belts, each heavier than they look. The leather straps bite into your palms through the gloves, and by the time you've carried them back to the main line, your shoulders ache with a deep, slow burn. You hand them off to the waiting sentry at the MG nest and take a moment to flex your fingers before heading back for another load. On the second trip, you pause along the route, crouching low as the faint thump of distant artillery rolls in from somewhere beyond the river. It's not close enough to worry about, not yet, but the sound carries through the cold, like a warning. Kranz listens too, then shrugs, muttering that it's probably just the Soviets adjusting their aim on some other poor unit. His tone is casual, but you notice he keeps glancing north as you walk. By midday, the supply detail is done. You return to the dugout, coat dusted with snow, and collapse onto the bench near the stove. A tin cup of hot liquid, more boiled barley than tea, warms your hands. Outside, the wind shifts, and with it comes a flurry of fine snow that swirls down into the trench. Clinging to the edges of helmets and the folds of greatcoats, the afternoon brings a different kind of work. Repairing the sandbag wall near the listening post. The bags have sagged under the weight of snow, some splitting at the seams where the burlap has frozen and cracked. You and 2 others pile fresh snow against the base for support, then add new bags on top. It's slow work, each lift and drop sending a puff of icy powder into the air. As you work, you can see the dark line of the tree line in the distance, where the snow turns to shadow under the boughs. Somewhere in there, according to rumor, is an abandoned Soviet field kitchen, left behind during the last retreat. A few men joke about liberating it in the spring, if it's still there, if the war hasn't rolled over it again by then. By late afternoon, the sky has gone from pale to leaden. Snow begins to fall in earnest, fat flakes drifting down in a steady curtain. The sound of the wind is muffled now, as if the whole landscape has pulled a blanket over itself. Patrols are shortened, and the guards rotate more frequently to keep anyone from stiffening into uselessness. You're on the last watch before the evening meal. The snow has settled thick on the trench's edge, softening its sharp lines. Your breath fogs the air in front of you, curling and dissipating into the grey. The horizon is little more than a blur now, but you still scan it out of habit, the same slow sweep you've done hundreds of times before. Somewhere behind you, the cookhouse bell clangs faintly. Dinner. Tonight, it's potato stew, bulked out with whatever the supply train had last delivered. The steam from the pot fogs up the cook's spectacle, making him look like some kind of sorcerer over a cauldron. You eat with the others, spoons scraping the bottom of the tin bowl, the warmth of the meal lingering longer than its flavour. Afterward, back in the dugout, someone passes around a small accordion, its bellows creaking like an old door. The tunes are slow and familiar, folk songs from different parts of Germany, each man humming along to the bits he knows. It's the closest thing to comfort you've felt all week, the music filling the small space with something lighter than the wind outside. As the evening wears on, the snow thickens further. The dugout entrance becomes a soft mound, and a few men take turns clearing it with a shovel, keeping the passage open. You pull your blanket tighter, listening to the muffled rhythm of shoveling and the accordion's fading notes. Before sleep claims you, you think about the supplies, about how many more trips it will take to keep the rifles fed, the stoves lit, the bellies just full enough to stand another day. Out here, the war isn't just fought with rifles and shells. It's fought with the quiet, relentless act of keeping things running. One box, one shovel, one bowl at a time. The snow tapers off overnight, leaving the trench line buried under a fresh, silent layer. In the morning, the light has a strange clarity to it, as though the world's been wiped clean, every edge sharpened against the white. Even the blackened stove chimney looks crisp, its thin ribbon of smoke curling lazily into the still air. You start the day on shovel duty, clearing the walkway between dugouts before it compacts into an icy slope. The work warms you more than the stove ever could, each heave of the shovel cutting a neat arc through the snow. A few of the others join in, their voices carrying soft across the trench as they trade quick jokes about the luxury boulevard you're carving. Not long after, the company runner arrives with a note. There's to be a meeting at the command dugout. You're not part of it, but word filters back soon enough. Reconnaissance has spotted movement near a partially frozen stream to the east. No one's sure if it's a small Soviet patrol or something larger. Either way, a watch is to be kept, and the listening posts reinforced. That's how you find yourself an hour later trudging toward the eastern sector, rifle slung, extra magazines clinking in your bread bag. The snow here is less disturbed, the drifts deeper. You move slowly, placing your boots into the prints of the man ahead. The air is so cold it almost hums in your ears, and the only other sound is the occasional groan of the ice where the stream runs sluggish beneath. The listening post is a shallow scrape dug into the bank, covered with branches and snow for concealment. From here, you can see the tree line across the stream, its dark fringe unmoving against the pale sky. 2 men are already in place, Schmidt and Voss, both from Saxony, both with the hollow-eyed look that comes from too many winter watches. They shift aside to make room, and you settle in, adjusting your scarf to cover more of your face. The hours pass slowly. Every so often, Schmidt lifts his binoculars and scans the tree line, while Voss keeps the field phone ready, its wires snaking back toward the main trench. You find yourself counting the cracks in the ice, watching how the snow collects in their jagged lines. Around midday, a small movement catches your eye, just a flicker, like a shadow ducking between trees. You murmur to Schmidt, who raises the binoculars again. He studies the spot for a long moment before lowering them, his breath misting in the air. Could be nothing, he says, though his tone suggests otherwise. The three of you keep a sharper watch after that. By the time the relief detail arrives, your legs are stiff and your hands ache from gripping the rifle. You trudge back toward the main line, the sound of the stream fading behind you. In the trench, someone's rigged a line of icicles along the sandbag wall, their glassy points catching the weak afternoon light. It's a pointless decoration, but you can't help admiring it. Anything to break the monotony of snow and grey. Late in the day, the mail arrives. A canvas sack, carried in by a shivering courier from the rear. It's sorted quickly, names called out in a steady rhythm. You get a single letter, thin paper, your name scrawled in a familiar hand. You wait until you're back in the dugout to open it, fingers fumbling with the flap. The words inside are brief, but enough. A note from home, a mention of your brother's work in a factory, and a joke about how you probably haven't shaved in weeks. You smile despite yourself, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into your breast pocket. Evening comes with a pale strip of sunset barely visible through the clouds. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and boiled grain. Supper is barley stew with a few precious slices of sausage floating in it, and you savor every bite. Afterward, you help mend a tear in one of the dugout's blankets, the needle and thread clumsy in gloved hands, but doing the job. Later still, the company's small radio is brought out. Its tinny speaker crackles to life, filling the dugout with a faint broadcast, a mix of static, clipped speech, and scratchy music. No one says much. They just listen, letting the sound be a reminder that somewhere beyond this frozen patch of land, there's still a world moving forward. Before turning in, you take one last walk along the trench. The snow glows faintly under the moonlight, each footprint a dark oval in the white. Somewhere far off, you hear the muffled pop of a flare gun, but it's too distant to be of concern. You breathe in the cold until your chest aches, then head back to the warmth of the dugout. As you settle under the blanket, the letter's words replay in your head, mingling with the memory of that shadow in the tree line. Out here, both carry the same weight. Small reminders that something is always just beyond your sight, whether it's danger or the thought of home. Morning brings a strange kind of stillness. Not the usual brittle quiet of winter, but something heavier, like the air itself is holding its breath. You wake to find the dugout dimmer than usual, the entryway blocked by a curtain of snow drifted in overnight. It takes a good 10 minutes of shoving and scooping just to push it aside. And when you finally step out, the trench line is half buried. The word from the company sergeant is simple: dig. Everyone's issued shovels, and the work begins immediately. The snow is packed and stubborn, crusted over by the wind. It clings to the sandbags, weighs down the duckboards, and hides the narrow firing slits along the parapet. You keep at it until your arms feel like lead, the steam from your breath curling around your scarf. By mid-morning, you've cleared a stretch of trench wide enough for 2 men to pass. The sun hasn't shown itself all day, but the light is oddly flat, reflecting off every surface until your eyes ache. Somewhere down the line, a couple of men have built up a small wall of snow into a makeshift bench. They sit on it for a minute before realizing it's colder than the ground. A runner from battalion arrives with an update. There's been increased Soviet artillery activity near Rizhev, a reminder that you're not far from one of the most bitterly contested stretches of the front. You've heard rumors for weeks. Some say the fighting there is worse than Stalingrad. Others insist it's just a holding action. The truth depends who you ask, and none of them sound eager to be the one finding out firsthand. Work stops briefly when a sentry spots movement in the open ground beyond the wire. It turns out to be nothing more than a stray dog, its coat patchy, tail tucked as it skirts the edge of the clearing. A few men whistle softly, but the animal keeps its distance. You can't blame it. Out here, even a dog knows better than to trust too quickly. After lunch, if you can call a thin soup with bread lunch, you're assigned to help repair one of the trench walls where the snowmelt has begun seeping through. It's slow work, packing in fresh sandbags and stamping them into place, but there's a certain satisfaction in seeing the line take shape again. The section leader jokes that the trench looks better than when you first arrived, though it's hard to imagine this place ever being better in the usual sense. The afternoon wears on with the usual rhythm. Some men haul wood from a supply sled. Others take turns boiling snow for drinking water. The stove in your dugout is coaxed into life again, its metal sides creaking as it heats. Someone wedges a pot of tea on top, and for a while, the place smells faintly of leaves and smoke instead of damp wool and unwashed gear. Toward evening, the sky shifts, a faint orange glow bleeding into the horizon before being swallowed by clouds. Orders come down for a listening watch. 2 men per sector, rotating every 2 hours through the night. Your turn falls in the early hours, the kind of time when the cold feels sharper, as if it's been resting all day just to greet you then. When the watch begins, you make your way to the appointed post with Feldman, a quiet fellow from Stuttgart, who's been with the unit since before Moscow. You settle into the snowbank, rifles resting across your knees. The moon casts a faint glow over the frozen ground, enough to make the landscape look like a blank sheet of paper, waiting for something to be written on it. The minutes stretch. Feldman says little, his eyes fixed on the wire ahead. Every now and then, you both hear faint cracks from the forest. Could be branches under snow. Could be something else. Neither of you move much, except to stamp your feet now and then, keeping the blood moving. Halfway through the watch, Feldman leans close and murmurs that he's sure he saw a flicker of light in the trees. You watch, holding your breath, but the darkness remains unbroken. Still, the unease lingers. It's always the not knowing that sits heavier than any confirmed threat. When you're finally relieved, your hands are stiff from the cold, the rifle sling biting into your shoulder. Back in the dugout, you ease down onto your bunk, pulling the blanket high. The stove has gone nearly cold, but the smell of lingering tea hangs in the air, a reminder of small comforts that somehow carry more weight than they should. As you drift towards sleep, you think about the trench wall you rebuilt, the orange strip of sky at dusk, and that faint flicker in the woods. Out here, the line between ordinary and dangerous is thinner than the ice on the stream, and just as easy to break. The morning after your listening watch, the cold feels different, denser somehow, as if the air has been packed tight overnight and left no room for movement. You pull on your boots, which have frozen into their shape by the stove, and find the laces brittle enough to snap if you tug too hard. Outside, the trench is quiet, save for the crunch of boots somewhere up the line. Word filters down from the platoon leader. A work party is heading out to check the forward observation post, a small wooden box of a shelter built just beyond the wire. You're among those chosen, mostly because you were on the last roster for digging, and they like to keep the rotations even. Feldman is coming too, which makes it easier. You've both learned to read each other's movements without much talking. The observation post is a short walk across a patch of frozen ground, but it's the sort of walk you make carefully. The snow hides holes, wire stubs, and the occasional trip hazard left from earlier battles. You can feel the weight of your rifle on your shoulder, and every step is deliberate, the sound muffled by the powder underfoot. When you reach the shelter, it's half buried, the roof sagging under the snow. You take turns clearing it off, the thump of each shovel load carrying in the stillness. Once inside, you find the viewing slit iced over, and it takes a few careful scrapes with a bayonet to clear it. The view beyond is the same as always. Tree line, open ground, and nothing moving. But the routine of keeping it clear is part of the job. You spend an hour there mostly in silence, scanning and adjusting the slit covering whenever the wind rattles it. Feldman pulls out a small scrap of paper and sketches the view. Something he says helps him notice changes if they happen later. You're not sure if it's official procedure or just his own habit, but it seems harmless enough. Back at the trench, the company has settled into the usual winter rhythm. Men mend torn gloves, scrape ice from rifle bolts, and heat snow for tea. The cook, a stocky man from Bremen, has managed to make something resembling stew from tinned meat and potatoes. It's the kind of meal that would barely pass for lunch back home, but here it draws appreciative murmurs. After eating, you're pulled for another task, moving ammunition crates from the rear to a covered storage nook closer to the line. The crates are heavy, their corners digging into your gloves, but the work keeps you warm. As you pass one of the dugouts, a gramophone is playing quietly, the faint crackle of some pre-war German waltz drifting into the air. It's almost surreal, hearing something so civilized here, where nothing else matches it. In the afternoon, you're assigned to check the trench periscope, a battered contraption of mirrors and tubes that's been frosting over every night. You and another soldier, Kruger, take turns breathing on the mirrors and wiping them clean with wool mittens. Through it, the view is distorted but serviceable. You can make out the snowy ground, a scattering of shell craters, and the dark verticals of trees. By the time the light begins to fade, the temperature has dropped again. You can see your breath in thicker clouds now, and the sound of shovels digging out a side path carries far in the still air. There's talk of another listening watch tonight, but this time you're spared. Your turn will come tomorrow. Instead, you're sent to help reinforce the parapet in a sector closer to the company HQ. It's less exposed there, and the work is easier with more hands. You stack sandbags carefully, tucking them into place until the wall feels solid again. Someone jokes that with this much reinforcement, the trench might outlast all of you. The humor is thin, but it keeps the pace steady. When the work's done, you make your way back to your dugout. The sky now a deep, dull blue. Inside, the stove is going again, and someone's boiled more tea. Feldman is there, hunched over his sketch from the observation post, adding little notations along the edges. He points out a darker patch in the tree line he hadn't noticed before, though it's probably nothing more than snow-laden branches. Still, it's the sort of detail the officers like to have on record. Later, as you lie under your blanket, you can hear the faint murmur of voices from the next dugout over. Someone is telling a story about their time near Smolensk in '41, describing summer heat and dust as though it's from another world. You close your eyes and picture it, not to escape the present, but to remind yourself that seasons do change, even here. The night passes with no alarms, no flickers in the tree line, no distant artillery thuds. just the wind moving across the open ground and the occasional snap of ice shifting in the trench walls. You find yourself grateful for the quiet, knowing it's never guaranteed. Out here, the absence of news really can be the best news you get. The quiet doesn't last. By mid-morning, a runner comes down the trench with word from the company commander. Patrols will be going out tonight. It's not a surprise. Nobody likes to sit still too long. But the timing means you'll spend the day preparing instead of settling into the usual winter routine. You and Feldman are in the second patrol, scheduled just before midnight. The plan is to check the ground between your wire and the edge of the woods, looking for signs of enemy movement or fresh digging. It's the kind of task that's equal parts dull and dangerous. Most of the time, you find nothing but snow and shadows, but sometimes there's more. The day becomes a slow procession of small preparations. You oil your rifle, check the sling, and make sure the spare ammunition pouches are where you can reach them in the dark. Feldman fusses over his boots, muttering about the last time he had to cross frozen ground and came back with the stitching half torn out. There's a quiet tension in the air. No panic, just that sense everyone gets before leaving the safety of the trench. Even the cook seems to sense it, pressing an extra slice of bread into your hand after the evening meal. You eat it slowly, letting the warmth from the stove sink in while you can. As night falls, the trench grows still. Those not on duty stay in their dugouts, voices lowered, lanterns turned down to slits. You sit near the fireless brazier with the other 4 men in your patrol, listening to the watch sergeant go over the route one last time. His voice is low, steady, as if he's reading from a script. When your turn comes, you climb out of the trench one by one, careful to keep low until your eyes adjust. The snow reflects what little light the moon gives, casting the ground in shades of silver and grey. Your breath hangs in front of you, slow and heavy, and every step crunches faintly underfoot. The wire looms ahead, dark shapes against the pale snow. You skirt along its edge, checking for signs it's been cut or tampered with. Feldman moves just ahead of you, his outline shifting with each cautious step. The woods are closer now, their edges indistinct in the dim light. A faint sound carries, nothing sharp, more like snow sliding from a branch, but everyone freezes for a moment. You wait, ears straining, but hear nothing else. Slowly, the patrol resumes, moving into the shallow depression that marks the forward observation point for this sector. It's just a scrape in the ground with a bit of brush piled around it, but you crouch there for several minutes, scanning the shadows. From here, the forest seems almost too still. The branches don't move, and the air feels heavier, as if waiting for something. Feldman glances at you, then at the sergeant, but there's no signal to pull back yet. You stay a little longer, shifting your weight to keep the cold from settling into your knees. When the return signal comes, it's a slow hand wave, deliberate, so there's no mistaking it. The patrol moves back the way it came, retracing each careful step. Passing the wire again feels like crossing a boundary you didn't realize had been weighing on you. Back in the trench, you hand over your report. Nothing unusual seen, no signs of digging or tracks. The sergeant nods and moves off to relay it to the company commander. You and the Feldman head straight for the dugout, eager to get out of the wind. Inside, the stove is glowing faintly, and someone's boiled a pot of tea. The warmth is immediate, seeping into your gloves and through your coat. You drink slowly, savoring the faint taste of leaves and smoke. Outside, another patrol heads out, their boots crunching in the snow as they disappear into the dark. Later, lying in your bunk, You think about how patrols like this have been happening for months, probably for both sides, and how rarely they change anything. But they do keep the line alive, a reminder that even in the stillness, you're part of something in motion. The wind rises during the night, rattling the dugout door and whistling through the trench. You drift in and out of sleep, half listening for footsteps that never come. By morning, the snow has drifted higher along the trench walls, and you have to shovel your way clear just to get to the latrine. Routine returns quickly. Rifle checks, sentry duty, carrying fuel for the stove. The patrol already feels like something from another week, but you know it will come around again soon enough. Out here, there's no such thing as a one-time task. By afternoon, word comes down that the regimental HQ wants a detailed sketch of the forward ground, based on the combined patrol's observations. Feldman volunteers the one he's been keeping since the last trip to the observation post. You help him add a few details from your memory. The shape of the drift near the wire, the faint dip in the snow where the depression starts. The officers seem pleased with it, and you hear a few comments about how such sketches help when planning larger movements. You're not sure what larger movements means in this weather, but you let the thought pass. For now, the front is quiet, and that's enough. As evening settles, the temperature drops again, and the air feels brittle in your lungs. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and listen to Feldman hum a tune under his breath, something slow and almost cheerful. In a place where the days blur, even a fragment of melody can feel like an anchor. You wake to the sound of boots on the duckboards and the low murmur of voices just outside the dugout. It's still early, judging by the thin grey light filtering through the doorway, but the air has the brittle sharpness of a colder than usual morning. You sit up slowly, tugging your coat tighter, and catch a few words from the conversation outside. Something about supplies arriving from the railhead. That's always a moment worth noticing. Out here, every delivery feels like a small event. You step into the trench, where a few men are already heading toward the junction to meet the ration detail. The snow is crusted and uneven, crunching underfoot in a way that echoes faintly between the walls. By the time you reach the junction, a small sled is already there, pulled by a pair of weary-looking horses. The driver, a corporal from the supply company, is stamping his feet to keep warm, while the quartermaster checks off the contents of the load. You see the usual: crates of tinned meat, sacks of flour, a few boxes of spare parts for the stoves. But there's something else too. A small wooden chest, the kind used for mail. Mail changes the air in a way no other delivery can. Even those without anything expected stand a little straighter, as if maybe there's a letter with their name on it after all. The quartermaster sets it on a crate, unlocks it, and begins calling out names. When yours comes up, it's for a single envelope, the paper slightly creased, the handwriting familiar in a way that tugs at the edges of your memory. You tuck it into your coat for now. You've learned not to read these things in the open, where the cold seeps into your fingers before you finish the first page. Back in the dugout, with the stove giving off a thin warmth, you open the envelope carefully. It's from your sister, written in the hurried but looping script she's had since she was a teenager. The letter talks about home, about the market in town, about the neighbor's cow that keeps getting loose, about the way the snow there has been softer this year. Nothing about the war, except to say she hopes you're keeping warm. You read it twice, then fold it neatly and slide it into the inside pocket of your coat. Later in the morning, orders come down for maintenance work along the trench. shoring up sections where the snowmelt has started to seep through the walls. You're paired with an older private named Kraus, who's been in the regiment longer than most. He works steadily, pausing now and then to adjust the angle of a board or to shift a sandbag. The work is repetitive but necessary. A weak spot in the trench wall has a way of becoming a problem at the worst possible time. By midday, your gloves are damp and your shoulders ache from lifting. The cook has set up a large pot of barley soup near the company HQ, and you take your tin cup there, letting the steam thaw your face as you eat. The taste is plain, but after a morning in the cold, plain is good enough. In the afternoon, word filters down that the division staff is moving some artillery pieces into position further along the line. The rumor is that they're to support an attack planned in another sector. Not here, at least not yet. But the sound of gun teams clattering along the frozen track is enough to draw attention. You watch them for a moment, the horse's breath pluming in the air, the crews huddled in greatcoats, before turning back to your assigned stretch of trench. As evening approaches, the temperature dips again, and a pale, almost colorless light settles over the snow. You take a moment to stand near the parapet, peering toward the tree line. The snow there looks untouched, smooth as a blank page, but you know better than to trust it. Somewhere out there, other men are watching from their own hidden positions, just as you are. When darkness comes, it's sudden. The last light swallowed by a sky heavy with low clouds. The lamps are lit sparingly, just enough to mark the safer stretches of the trench. You find yourself back in the dugout with Feldman and Kraus, the three of you sitting close to the stove, talking quietly about nothing in particular. Stories about barracks life before the war, the way coffee used to taste in certain cafes, the odd characters you meet in every posting. The letter in your coat feels heavier now, though in a comforting way. You take it out once more, reading by the dim light of the lantern. For a few minutes, you can almost picture the town again. The familiar streets, the little bakery on the corner. The fire in the stove pops softly, and the world outside seems far away. Somewhere along the line, the conversation drifts into silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. You stretch out on your bunk, the sound of the wind against the dugout roof almost steady enough to be mistaken for waves on a shore. You know it's not, of course, but the mind is good at finding echoes when it wants them. The morning starts with a sky the color of pewter and a stillness that makes you think the air itself is waiting for something. You step out of the dugout into that half light, boots crunching into the thin crust of ice that formed overnight. The trench is quiet except for the occasional cough or the muted thump of someone closing a box. A runner from battalion headquarters appears just after roll call, moving along the line with a leather satchel under his arm. He stops at your section and hands the Feldwebel a folded sheet, marked with the red wax stamp of the regimental staff. Orders. Everyone watches as the Feldwebel reads, his eyes scanning quickly before he tucks the paper into his coat. Inspection at first light tomorrow, he says, voice low but carrying. Full kit, and make sure your rifles are clean. No excuses. Inspections are an old ritual, but out here they carry a different weight. It's less about polish and more about proving the unit's still capable, still ready. You spend the better part of the morning breaking down your weapon, oiling the moving parts, checking for any sign of wear that could cause trouble. The rifle smells faintly of the oiled rag, a scent that clings to your gloves even after you set it aside. By midday, the light has shifted into a flat, cold glare, reflecting off the snow until your eyes ache. The cooks have ladled out bowls of potato stew, thicker than usual, and you eat leaning against the trench wall, steam from the food rising in little clouds. The talk is muted, mostly about the inspection, about whether the company commander will bother coming in person or send a lieutenant. In the afternoon, you're assigned to a wiring detail, replacing sections of barbed wire that have sagged under the weight of snow. It's slow work, the kind that makes your fingertips sting even through gloves. Kraus is with you again, and he works in steady silence, occasionally nodding toward the tree line as if checking for movement. At one point, he mutters that it feels too quiet today. You agree without saying so out loud. The wire goes up in uneven sections, twisted into shape with cold, stiffened pliers. Somewhere to your left, you hear the distant clink of another team working, the sound carrying strangely in the still air. You pause for a moment, leaning on the handle of your wire cutters, and catch the faint smell of wood smoke from somewhere beyond the lines. As the light begins to fade, the temperature drops sharply, the cold biting through your coat, in a way that feels almost personal. You finish the last section of wire and head back toward the dugouts, boots dragging a little now. The first lanterns are being lit, their glow catching in the frost that rims the trench boards. Inside, the stove is already lit, a thin plume of smoke curling from its pipe. Feldman is sitting at the small table, sharpening a pencil and working on a letter. He glances up as you come in, gives a nod, then returns to his writing. The scratching of the pencil on paper is oddly comforting. Later, you pull your own small notebook from your pack. It's not for letters, just a few pages where you jot down dates, small events, the kind of details that blur together otherwise. You note the coming inspection, the work on the wire, the way the air smelled of wood smoke. It's not much, but it's something to mark the passing days. By the time you close the notebook, the stove has warmed the dugout enough to take off your gloves. You pour yourself a cup of tea from the dented kettle, the taste slightly metallic, but better than nothing. Kraus comes in a little later, shaking the snow from his coat, and the three of you settle into the quiet rhythm of the evening. Small talk, the occasional laugh, the comfort of shared space. Outside, the night deepens. Somewhere far off, a single artillery round thuds into the ground, the sound dull and heavy under the snow. No one moves. It's too far to be a threat, more a reminder that the wider war is still moving somewhere beyond your narrow stretch of line. When you finally turn in, the lantern still burns low, casting long shadows across the timber walls. You lie back, coat pulled over your shoulders, listening to the faint hiss of the stove and the occasional pop from its metal skin. The air smells of smoke, tea, and the faint tang of oiled steel. Sleep comes slowly, the kind that drifts in and out, carrying fragments of home, the clink of wire cutters, the glare of snow under a pale sky. And through it all, that sense of waiting, because tomorrow will bring the inspection, and after that, perhaps something else entirely. Morning comes grey and soundless, the kind of light that feels less like daybreak and more like the absence of night. You rise before the bugle, tugging on your coat and stepping outside into a trench glazed with thin ice. The cold bites your cheeks immediately, sharp and dry. The company is already stirring, men pulling on boots, stamping their feet to get the blood moving. The Feldwebel moves briskly down the line, checking that everyone is ready for the inspection. "Full kit," he says again, though he doesn't need to. Every man has heard it half a dozen times. When the officer finally arrives, a tall Hauptmann in a well-kept coat. There's a subtle shift in the air. You stand straighter, rifle slung just so, boots are lined along the trench floor. He walks the line without hurry, his eyes scanning each man in turn. He asks your name, glances at your rifle, and nods once before moving on. The inspection takes less than an hour, though the tension makes it feel longer. When it's over, the Hauptmann exchanges a few quiet words with the Feldwebel, then departs the way he came, boots crunching over the frost. The rest of the morning is given over to chores, stacking ammunition crates, clearing ice from the trench boards, making small repairs to the dugout roof. The work keeps you warm, and the steady rhythm makes the hours pass without too much thought. By afternoon, the sky begins to clear, pale blue showing through the ragged cloud. It's still cold, but the sunlight catches on the snow and makes it almost bearable. You take a moment, leaning on your shovel, to look past the wire toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, the front bends and twists through forests and villages you've never seen, held by men you'll never meet. There's a strange calm in that thought, a reminder that your small stretch of earth is just one fragment in something vast. You return to work, the sound of your own shovel mixing with the muffled voices of the others. When the light fades, the trench glows with the warm flicker of lanterns. Supper is a thin soup and a slice of bread, eaten slowly as you sit shoulder to shoulder with the others. No one talks much. The quiet feels earned. Later, you step outside one last time. The night is clear now, the stars sharp and cold above you. Your breath drifts away in small clouds, and the air smells faintly of wood smoke and iron. Somewhere far off, a dog barks. You stand there for a while, hands in your pockets, feeling the winter settle in around you. You've made it through another day on the Eastern Front's frozen line. And now, the sounds fade. The trench, with all its rough boards and narrow pathways, becomes just a dim memory. The crisp bite of the air softens, replaced by the gentler warmth of whatever blanket you're under right now. That pale blue sky over the snow drifts further away until it's only a soft haze at the edge of your thoughts. The boots you wore all day, heavy, stiff, dusted with ice, are gone. The gloves, the coat, the endless weight of the rifle over your shoulder, all of it set aside. In their place is only the ease of being still. Imagine the lantern in the dugout turned low, its light glowing gold against the wood. Imagine the quiet, the kind that's almost a sound in itself. Steady, unbroken, safe. Outside, snow falls in fine lazy flakes, each one finding its place without hurry. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of a distant stove's soft hiss. There's no inspection coming, no orders to follow, no chores waiting in the cold. Just this moment, and the next one, and the next, each one easier than the last. Even the war itself, with all its noise and motion, is somewhere far away now. Out beyond the snow, beyond the wire, beyond the reach of your thoughts. And in its place, there's only the steady calm of winter. The stars overhead, the ground beneath you, solid and still, and you, quiet, warm, at rest. Let it all drift away, the snow, the trench, the cold, until there's nothing left to carry, only the warmth, the quiet, and the slow, steady breath of someone who has made it home, if only in dreams.